Why would you serve my mother with plastic plate while everyone gets exotic treatments?
Somewhere in Georgia, there is a photograph that no one in the Whitfield family has ever put in an album. It shows a woman in her 60s sitting alone near a kitchen door at her own daughter's wedding, eating from a plastic plate while 300 other guests eat from white china edged in gold. She is not crying in the photograph. She is not angry. She is simply sitting there, upright, dignified, holding a plastic fork the way someone holds something they have decided not to be ashamed of. Her daughter, the bride, is 30 feet away in a wedding dress that cost more than her mother's monthly income, smiling for a camera, not yet knowing what she is about to find out. By the end of that night, one woman's quiet decision would change the direction of two families forever, and almost no one in that room saw it coming. Her name was Danielle Reeves, and for 29 years she had been the kind of daughter people described as easy to love. She was warm without being naive, composed without being cold, and she had learned very early in life that the people who raised her had sacrificed more than they ever spoke about out loud. Her mother, Gloria Reeves, had worked 2 jobs for most of Danielle's childhood, and her father, Marcus Reeves, had spent 30 years on his feet at a freight company so that his daughter would never have to ask him for something twice. They were not wealthy. They had never pretended to be. What they had instead was a kind of steadiness that Danielle carried with her into every room she ever walked into, including the one where she first met Julian Whitfield. Julian was different from the men Danielle had dated before, not because he was wealthier, though he was, but because he seemed genuinely unimpressed by his own family's money. He worked hard, he listened when Danielle spoke, and in the early years of their relationship, he made a point of showing up for her family the way he expected her to show up for his. What Danielle did not fully understand yet, because Julian himself had spent a lifetime avoiding it, was how much of his gentleness toward her existed alongside a complete inability to stand up to his mother. Vivian Whitfield had built her identity around appearances. She had raised Julian in a house where the right schools, the right neighborhood, and the right last names mattered more than almost anything else, and she had never fully hidden her disappointment when Julian brought Danielle home for the first time. It was not cruelty exactly, not at first. It was smaller than that. It was the way Vivian asked Danielle where her family was from before she asked what Danielle did for a living. It was the way she complimented Gloria's cooking at a family dinner in a tone that sounded almost surprised. Danielle noticed these things. Julian, for the most part, did not, or chose not to. By the time Julian proposed, 2 years into the relationship, Vivian had made her peace with the marriage in the way people make peace with things they cannot control, which is to say, she had not made peace with it at all. She had simply decided to control what she still could, and the wedding, paid for mostly by the Whitfield family, gave her exactly the kind of control she wanted. The wedding took place on a warm Saturday in late October at a countryside estate 2 hours outside the city, the kind of venue with manicured lawns and a guest list long enough to require a seating chart 3 pages thick. Danielle spent the morning getting ready in a bridal suite full of laughter, her best friend Patrice Coleman fixing her veil for the 4th time, her mother Gloria sitting quietly in the corner in a pale blue dress she had saved for 8 months to afford, watching her daughter with an expression she would later describe simply as full. Down the hall, in a separate suite, Vivian Whitfield was reviewing the final details of the reception with the venue's catering manager, a conversation that would later become the most talked about 10 minutes of the entire wedding, though no one in that room fully understood its weight at the time. Vivian spoke quietly, efficiently, the way she spoke about most things she considered beneath a full explanation. She gestured toward a section of the seating chart near the kitchen entrance, said a few words the catering manager would later struggle to repeat exactly, and walked away before anyone could ask her to clarify what she meant. Julian, getting dressed 2 doors down, had no idea any of this was happening. He would later say, more than once, that if he had known, he would have stopped it immediately. Whether that was true remained one of the questions this story would leave hanging over him for a long time afterward. The ceremony itself was, by every account, beautiful. Danielle walked down an aisle lined with white roses on the arm of her father, who cried before she even reached the altar, something Marcus Reeves had not done at either of his own siblings' weddings, and would later admit he had not expected from himself. Julian cried too, which surprised no one who knew him, and for 20 minutes, under a clear October sky, none of the tension that had quietly built over 2 years seemed to matter at all. Vows were exchanged, rings were exchanged. Gloria Reeves sat in the front row beside her husband, her hands folded in her lap, watching her only daughter become a wife with the kind of pride that does not need to announce itself. If anyone had asked her in that moment what she wanted from the rest of the day, she would have said only that she wanted to watch her daughter be happy. She had no idea that in less than 2 hours, she would become the center of a story that neither she nor her daughter had asked to be part of. The guests were led from the ceremony lawn into the reception hall as the sun began to lower, and for the last time that day, everything still felt exactly the way a wedding is supposed to feel. Inside the reception hall, round tables were dressed in white linen, each one set with fine china edged in gold, crystal glassware, and printed menu cards listing a 3-course dinner. It was the kind of table setting meant to be photographed, and for nearly every guest in the room, it was. Near the far wall, close enough to the kitchen doors that servers passed by it every few minutes, sat a single folding table set differently from the rest. 2 plastic plates, 2 plastic cups, a folded paper napkin instead of the embroidered linen used everywhere else in the room. Seated at that table were Gloria and Marcus Reeves. No formal announcement was made. No one stood up and pointed. The difference simply existed, quietly, the way certain decisions are designed to exist, visible to anyone who looked closely enough, but easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. Patrice Coleman, moving through the room checking on the bridal party, was the first person outside the catering staff to notice, and she noticed within minutes. She did not say anything to the room. She found Danielle instead. What Patrice told her, in a hallway just off the reception hall, was simple and specific, the kind of detail that does not need embellishment to land hard. Danielle's mother and father, the 2 people who had given up more for this wedding than anyone else in that building, were eating off plastic while every other guest, including people Danielle barely knew, ate off china that cost more per place setting than Gloria Reeves had ever spent on herself in a single year. Danielle did not raise her voice. She did not cry. She walked back into the reception hall and found the table herself, and for a long moment she simply stood there, looking at her mother eating from a plastic plate with the same steady dignity Gloria had carried her entire life, refusing to let anyone see how much it hurt her. Danielle's face, in the photographs taken in that exact moment, shows almost nothing at all, which is precisely what makes those photographs so difficult to look at once you know what they capture. Julian saw the table too. He would later admit, quietly and only once, that he had looked across the room, seen his mother's expression, and understood immediately what had happened. He would also admit that in that moment, he said nothing. He did not walk over to his mother. He did not walk over to Danielle. He simply looked away, and that single choice, more than anything Vivian herself had done, would become the detail Danielle found hardest to forgive. Danielle excused herself from the head table minutes later, telling only Patrice where she was going. What she did in the next 20 minutes would determine everything that happened for the remainder of the night, and very few people in that reception hall had any idea it was happening at all. Danielle did not confront Vivian in front of 300 guests. She had grown up watching her mother handle humiliation without theater, and some part of her, even furious, chose the same path. Instead, she found the venue coordinator, a woman named Renee who had been managing the day's logistics since early morning, and asked for 3 things, calmly and specifically. She asked for the seating chart to be quietly adjusted before the toasts began. She asked the DJ to hold the scheduled speeches by 15 minutes, and she asked the photographer, who had been documenting the day since sunrise, for something Renee did not fully understand until much later that evening. While these arrangements were being made behind the scenes, Danielle returned to the reception hall and sat beside Julian as though nothing at all had happened, smiling for guests who stopped by the head table, thanking people for coming, giving no indication of what was unfolding a few rooms away. It was, several guests later admitted, one of the more unsettling parts of the entire evening in hindsight, because Danielle's composure gave absolutely nothing away. She did find one moment alone with Julian, in a corridor near the restrooms, away from the noise of the reception. She told him plainly what she had seen at the folding table, and she asked him directly why he had looked away instead of doing something. Julian did not have a good answer. He offered an apology that sounded more like an excuse, something about not wanting to make a scene at his own wedding, and Danielle listened to every word of it without interrupting him once. When he finished, she told him only that she was not finished with the evening yet, and walked back toward the reception hall before he could ask her what she meant. Word of the folding table had, by now, begun moving quietly through the room, the way these things always do, guest to guest, in lowered voices between courses. Several relatives on the Whitfield side later admitted they noticed the whispering before they understood what it was about. Vivian Whitfield, seated near the center of the room, smiled through the murmurs without knowing yet that the quiet decision she had made that morning was no longer contained to a single table near the kitchen. When the microphone was finally handed to the wedding party for toasts, nearly 45 minutes later than originally planned, the room had no idea that the delay itself had been intentional. Julian's best man spoke first, followed by Patrice, whose toast was warm and funny and gave no hint of what was coming. Then, instead of Julian's mother taking the microphone as originally scheduled, Danielle stood up herself, asked quietly for everyone's attention, and began to speak. She did not raise her voice. She did not mention the folding table directly. Instead, she told the room a short, specific story about her mother, the kind of story that only a daughter could tell, about years of double shifts, about a woman who had skipped her own birthday dinners so there would be enough left over for Danielle's school trips, about a father who had worked 3 decades on his feet without ever once complaining in front of his daughter. As she spoke, the screen behind her, which every guest assumed would show the standard wedding slideshow, instead displayed a sequence of photographs the room had never seen before, image after image, documenting exactly what Gloria and Marcus Reeves had given up over the years to help make this wedding possible. The final image on the screen was not a photograph from Danielle's childhood at all. It was a photograph taken less than an hour earlier of 2 plastic plates sitting beside 2 crystal glasses on a table draped in white linen, side by side, close enough to compare. The room went quiet in a way it had not been quiet all evening. Several guests would later describe the moment not as dramatic, but as devastating, precisely because Danielle never once raised her voice while doing it. What happened next was the part of the evening that guests would still be discussing at family gatherings a year later. As the applause for Danielle's toast settled, Renee, the coordinator, quietly guided Gloria and Marcus Reeves from their folding table near the kitchen to 2 empty seats that had, until that moment, gone unnoticed at the head table itself, directly beside the newlyweds, in full view of the entire room. At the same time, 2 place settings originally reserved for members of the Whitfield family were moved, without announcement, to the folding table near the kitchen doors, plastic plates and all. Danielle never called it revenge, not that night, and not afterward. When guests asked her about it later, she described it only as fairness, insisting that if one arrangement had been acceptable for her parents, it should be equally acceptable for anyone else in the room. Whether or not the room believed her explanation, the message reached every person watching, including Vivian Whitfield, who understood immediately, without anyone needing to explain it to her, that the entire reception now knew exactly what she had done that morning. Vivian did not make a scene. She sat, for the remainder of the toasts, with the same composure she had spent a lifetime perfecting, though several relatives later described her expression as unmistakably shaken. For the first time that evening, Julian stood up, walked directly to his mother's table, and said something to her quietly enough that no one else in the room could hear. Whatever he said, it was, by every account from people who knew him, the first time in his adult life he had spoken to Vivian that way in front of other people. In the weeks that followed the wedding, the story of the folding table became something of a quiet legend within both families, told and retold with slightly different details each time. Vivian Whitfield initially tried to frame the seating arrangement as a simple miscommunication with the catering staff, a story almost no one who had been in that reception hall fully believed. Gloria Reeves, for her part, never once brought the incident up publicly. When a cousin asked her directly how she felt about what had happened, Gloria reportedly said only that she had raised a daughter who knew the difference between right and wrong, and that was enough for her. Julian, according to people close to the family, began setting boundaries with his mother that he had never set before, small at first, then increasingly firm, a shift that surprised nearly everyone who had known him for years. It was, several relatives said, as though the events of that single evening had finally given him permission to say things to Vivian he had wanted to say for a very long time. The marriage between Julian and Danielle, by every account available, only grew stronger in the months that followed, though those close to the couple say the wedding day itself was rarely discussed directly, as though both of them understood there was nothing left to add to what had already been said in that reception hall. What makes this story linger long after the wedding itself has faded into family legend is not the plastic plate at all. It is the choice Danielle Reeves made in the minutes after she discovered it, the decision to answer humiliation with composure instead of confrontation, to let a single photograph on a slideshow screen say what she refused to say with a raised voice. She never confronted Vivian directly. She never needed to. She simply made sure the truth was impossible to ignore and let the room draw its own conclusions. It raises a question worth sitting with long after the story ends. When someone tries to quietly diminish the people you love, is the loudest response always the strongest one, or is there a version of justice that says more by staying calm than anger ever could? Would you have done what Danielle did, or would you have said something the moment you saw that folding table? Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Sniff.